3,000 years or 5,000 years? Just how old is the pharaoh anyway? Hello everyone, I'm Homo Arbacora and welcome to Silent Author Productions. I'm here today to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Woo! Call me a dinosaur, but I love this show, especially the original series Duel Monsters. And speaking of dinosaurs, let's talk about today the Pharaoh. So if you're even a little bit into Yu-Gi-Oh!, you know that the main character shares a body with the soul of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. However, after this, the dub and the original start to split on this mysterious spirit's past. In the manga and original Japanese anime, the pharaoh is said to have reigned 3,000 years ago, but according to the dub, it's 5,000. Now I could go ahead and say, it's 4 kids and everything they say is wrong, but I think we need to have a little more info before we can just dismiss them offhand. After all, the fans themselves seem to be pretty split on the number. I've seen a lot of fan fiction, YouTube comments, and other places where fans will equally say that he's 5,000 or 3,000 years old. So, without further ado, let's take a look at some history to settle the debate once and for all. First, let's take a look at the dates that both sides are proposing. In the Japanese, we're looking at about 1000 BC, give or take a few decades maybe. In the English, 3000 BC. What was happening in Egypt around these times? Well, around 3000 BC, Egypt was literally just getting started. The country had only really existed for about 100 years. The very first pharaohs would have started ruling around this time. Not much is really known about this period because it's so old and there hasn't been a whole lot excavated. We're missing whole chunks of dynasties and it's hard to fill in the gaps. This was also about the time that the pharaohs were uniting the upper and lower parts of Egypt. Now let's look at 1000 BC. This was the third intermediate period, where we pretty much know every king in order and for how long they ruled. During this time, there is some division and some fighting between petty rulers. Not to mention, Upper and Lower Egypt split about 100 years ago, so there's fighting between those two kingdoms as well. Towards the end of this period, the country is overtaken by the Persians. So what does this give us? Let's go back to the anime. In the anime, it's stated that Atem is being beset by some kind of invaders, which is the reason for creating the Millennium items. This could easily be the period 5,000 years ago when the pharaohs were still uniting Egypt. However, this could also be some early form of the Persian invasions from 3,000 years ago, or fighting between petty rulers or invaders from Upper or Lower Egypt, most likely Upper Egypt. One thing that does give the 5,000-year theory more weight is all the missing chunks of dynasties from so long ago. That would make it perfectly reasonable to make a fictional character and plot them somewhere that's hidden by time. It would be easier than pretending there is suddenly a dynasty shoved in between the long years of Ramses in 1000 BC. So that's 1 point for the 5,000-year theory, but another point towards the 3,000-year theory in that it's more likely that the fighting and invasions came from the fighting between Upper and Lower Egypt. Now I'd like to draw everyone's attention to Egypt itself, or rather, the landscape of Egypt. Do you see it yet? Well, how about now? It's the pyramids, they're right there, okay? The pyramids definitely show up prominently in the anime. Why is this important? Because construction for those pyramids wouldn't start until 2584 BC. And no, they couldn't be other pyramids because, well, there are no other pyramids like those three. Building tombs like that wasn't exactly cheap, you know? Other pyramids were much, much smaller, and you wouldn't be able to see them so clearly from the distances we see them in Yu-Gi-Oh! Also, they were entirely different shape. Most of them were step-shaped, like this one here. If we take that into account, there's absolutely no way that Yu-Gi-Oh's plot could have taken place 5,000 years ago. The pyramids wouldn't have existed for another 2,000 years. But, Homura, maybe Kazuki Takahashi didn't think about that much, and just threw the pyramids in there to shout, "This is Egypt." Well, maybe, but I think you're trying too hard. Another point to the 3,000-year theory. Okay, this scene. And this one. What's wrong with the 5,000-year theory now? Egypt didn't have horses or steel until about 1700 BC. Around that time, the country was invaded by the Hyksos, a group of mixed Semitic Asiatics who took control and ruled for about 100 years. They introduced the horse and chariot and advanced fortifications, as well as steel. Before this time, swords and horses would not have existed in Egypt. Just one more point for the 3,000-year theory. And there's another piece that gives the 3,000-year theory even more credence. When Atem died, he was clearly buried in the Valley of Kings. Sugoroku Muto says in the manga and anime that he is in the Valley of Kings when he goes to retrieve the Millennium Puzzle. Burials here almost exclusively took place between 1539 BC and 1075 BC. If Atem had been buried 5,000 years ago, it's likely he would have been buried in something like a step pyramid. But because tomb robbers have been getting into the big noticeable tombs for so long, the Valley of the Kings was supposed to help hide the tombs from robbers. So that's 2 more points in the 3,000-year theory's favor. Okay, let's review. First, Akhnaten had to deal with some sort of invading threat. While this would have been more likely 5,000 years ago, it's also possible that the fighting would have come from the split between Upper and Lower Egypt, or from early branches of the Persians, which happened around 1100 BC. So those two kind of cancel each other out. Second, it's probably easier to put a fictional character into a space without any known kings than to pretend that Atem's family reigned in some made-up space between the well-known dynasties. Third, the pyramids, which couldn't have existed 5,000 years ago. Fourth, the horses and steel swords, as well as technology like catapults, which would have only appeared during Hyksos rule. And finally, Atem's burial in the Valley of Kings, which was almost exclusive to the period around 1500 to 1000 BC. With all the evidence, I have to say it's almost positive that Atem's reign happened during 1000 BC. The Japanese were right. No surprises there. But then why would 4Kids say 5,000? I'm not entirely sure. In fact, they might have just pulled it out of the you-know-where, just to make it sound like it was longer ago. My theory is that there was a mistranslation, as in some of the early episodes of the Japanese version, the opening states that games go back 5,000 years. 4Kids might have mistakenly interpreted that as meaning that the pharaoh was 5,000 years old, but really it was just saying that games go back about 5,000 years in Egyptian history. So, there you have it. Atem is officially 3,000 years old. Happy birthday, Pharaoh. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, why don't you click that little like button? You know, if you want. I have a couple other videos if you'd like to see more of me, and they should show up on the screen right here. If you're interested in seeing future videos about Yu-Gi-Oh!, My Little Pony, Puella Magi Madoka Magica, or whatever other thing strikes my fancy, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Feel free to find me on fanfiction.net, DeviantArt, and Tumblr accounts, where I post even more hopelessly nerdy stuff. Thanks again for watching. I'm Homura Bakura, and until next time, game on!